The rusty bus wheezed to a stop at what barely qualified as a station, just a weathered wooden bench beside a hand-painted sign that read, Black Ridge Population 847. Arya Lorne shouldered her worn backpack, the only possession that had traveled with her through 3 states and countless sleepless nights. The bus doors hissed open, releasing her into air so thick with pine and rain that it felt almost solid against her skin. "End of the line, miss," the driver called without looking back. His voice carried an odd relief, as if he couldn't wait to put distance between himself and this place. Arya stepped onto cracked asphalt, her boots splashing in a puddle that reflected the gray October sky. The bus pulled away immediately, its engine straining as it climbed back up the winding mountain road. Within moments, the sound faded entirely, leaving her alone with the whisper of wind through towering evergreens. Blackridge stretched before her like something pulled from a half-remembered dream. Victorian houses with intricate gingerbread trim-lined narrow streets that curved around gentle hills. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, and warm yellow light spilled from windows decorated with autumn wreaths. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, something cold settled in her stomach. The silence was wrong. In any normal town this size, there should have been children playing, dogs barking, the distant hum of conversation. But Blackridge sat wrapped in an unnatural quiet that made her footsteps sound unnaturally loud against the wet pavement. Arya pulled her jacket tighter and headed toward what looked like the main street. She'd chosen this place randomly, stabbing a finger at a map while hiding in a truck stop bathroom 2 days ago. Somewhere small, isolated, where nobody would think to look for her, where she could finally stop running and figure out how to build a life worth living. But with each step, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. She passed a small grocery store with darkened windows, though it was only 4 in the afternoon. A coffee shop with chairs stacked on tables, despite the open sign hanging crooked in the door. Even the gas station looked abandoned, its pumps covered in rust and its neon sign flickering weakly against the gathering dusk. "Excuse me," she called to a woman hurrying past with her head down. "I'm looking for—" The woman glanced up, and her eyes widened with something that looked distinctly like fear. Without a word, she quickened her pace and disappeared around the nearest corner. Arya stood frozen, confusion and hurt warring in her chest. What had she done wrong? She'd showered at the last rest stop, knew she looked presentable enough. Was there something about her that screamed, "outsider," so loudly it sent locals fleeing? Movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. A man stood in the shadow of a massive oak tree, so still she might have mistaken him for a statue, if not for the way his dark clothes seemed to ripple in the breeze. When their eyes met across the empty street, he didn't look away, just stared with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Arya forced herself to turn and continue walking, but her shoulders tensed with the certainty that he was following. She could feel his presence like heat against her back, close enough to touch but always just outside her direct line of sight. The main street opened into a small town square, centered around a fountain that had long since run dry. Fallen leaves carpeted the cobblestones in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, if not for the way they muffled her footsteps into an eerie silence. That's when she saw them. At first, just shadows shifting between the trees that bordered the square. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the canopy above, the shadows took shape. 4 wolves, each nearly the size of a small horse, moved with the fluid grace of apex predators. Their fur ranged from silver gray to deep black, and their eyes, those eyes glowed amber in the dying light. Arya's breath caught in her throat. She'd heard there were wolf populations in this part of the mountains, but seeing them in person, so close to town, sent every survival instinct she possessed screaming into high alert. Don't run. The thought came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Don't make sudden movements. Don't show fear. But as the wolves began to circle the square, keeping to the shadows but never losing sight of her, Arya realized they weren't hunting in any way she understood. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, like soldiers taking positions. The largest wolf stepped into the open, its black coat gleaming like oil in the fading light. It was beautiful and terrible, with scars across its muzzle that spoke of countless battles. When it opened its mouth, revealing teeth longer than her fingers, a low growl rumbled from its chest. Arya's legs turned to water, but she forced herself to remain still. Moving would only trigger their pursuit instincts. She'd read that somewhere. In some nature documentary watched during one of many sleepless nights in cheap motel rooms, the other wolves emerged from the shadows now, forming a loose circle around her. The gray one to her left was lean and quick-looking, its intelligent eyes never leaving her face. The brown wolf on her right was broader, more muscular, with a presence that suggested leadership within the pack hierarchy. But it was the silver wolf directly behind her that made her skin crawl. She could feel its attention like ice against her spine, could hear the whisper of its breathing in the still air. When she risked a glance over her shoulder, its pale eyes met hers with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The black wolf took another step forward, and Arya knew with crushing certainty that this was it. This was how her story ended. Not in the arms of someone who loved her, not surrounded by friends and family, but alone in a strange town, torn apart by predators that had somehow recognized her as prey the moment she'd stepped off that bus. She closed her eyes and waited. The roar that split the air was so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. It wasn't the howl of a wolf, or the cry of any animal she'd ever heard. It was something primal and commanding, a sound that spoke directly to the most ancient parts of the brain and demanded immediate submission. Arya's eyes snapped open to see the wolves backing away, their heads lowered and tails tucked. Even the massive black alpha that had been moments away from attacking was retreating, though its amber eyes remained fixed on something behind her. She turned slowly, and her heart stopped. He stood at the edge of the square like something carved from storm clouds and starlight. Tall enough that she had to crane her neck to see his face, with shoulders that strained against a dark sweater, and in presence that seemed to command the very air around him. His hair was black as midnight and slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that held her captive, golden amber that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. He looked at her for one long moment, and in that look, Arya felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been sleeping her entire life suddenly stirred to wakefulness, recognizing him on a level deeper than sight or sound. "Back down," he said, and though his voice was quiet, it carried absolute authority. "All of you." The wolves didn't just retreat. They fled, disappearing into the forest so quickly that Arya might have imagined their presence if not for the lingering scent of wild musk and danger. The man stepped closer, and Arya caught his scent, pine and rain, and something indefinably masculine that made her knees weak. Up close, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his jaw clenched as if he was holding back words that might shatter the fragile quiet between them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries with professional thoroughness. "No, Arya's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "No, I'm fine. Thank you." He nodded once, but didn't move away. If anything, he seemed to be studying her with the same intensity the wolves had shown, though with an entirely different kind of hunger in his gaze. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. The words stung more than they should have. "I just arrived. I haven't done anything wrong. That's not what I meant." His voice was rough, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "This isn't a safe place for someone like you. Someone like me." His jaw tightened further. "Someone who doesn't belong to a pack." The words made no sense, but something about the way he said them sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't understand." For a moment, it looked like he might explain. His lips parted, and she saw something that might have been longing flash across his features. Then his expression closed off, becoming distant and unreadable. "Go back to wherever you came from," he said. "Tonight. Don't stay in this town." He turned to leave, and panic flared in Arya's chest. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing against his arm. The contact sent a shock of electricity through her entire body, and she snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. The man went completely still. When he looked down at her, his eyes were blazing with something that made her breath catch. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arya. Arya Lorne." He repeated her name like a prayer, and she felt something deep in her chest respond to the sound of it on his lips. "I'm Caden. Caden Thorne. Thank you for saving me," she said. "From the wolves." Caden's expression grew pained. "The wolves aren't what you need saving from." Before she could ask what he meant, he was walking away, his long strides carrying him quickly toward the tree line. Just before he disappeared into the forest, he called back over his shoulder. "Find somewhere else to go, Arya Lorne. For both our sakes." and then he was gone, leaving her alone in the empty square with the lingering scent of pine and the bone-deep certainty that her life had just changed forever. The Blackridge Inn sat on a hill overlooking the town, its Victorian architecture more weathered than charming in the dying light. Arya climbed the front steps with her backpack heavy on her shoulders, and Caden's warning echoing in her mind. But she had nowhere else to go. The front desk was unmanned, though a small brass bell sat beside a leather-bound guest registry. Arya rang it twice before footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. The woman who appeared was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Arya's appearance in a single glance. Her smile was polite, but strained. "I'd like a room for the night," Arya said. "Maybe longer, depending on whether there's work available in town." The woman's smile faltered. "I'm afraid we're fully booked." Arya glanced around the empty lobby, noting the keys hanging on hooks behind the desk. Every single room appeared to be available. "Are you sure? I'm not picky about accommodations. I can pay cash. I'm sorry, but please." The word came out more desperate than Arya intended. "I've been traveling for days. I just need somewhere safe to sleep." Something in her tone must have touched the woman's conscience, because her stern expression softened slightly. She glanced toward the front windows, as if checking to make sure they weren't being watched, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Room 12, she whispered, sliding a key across the desk. "Top floor, end of the hall. Keep your curtains drawn and don't wander the building after dark." Arya took the key with trembling fingers. "Thank you. I'm Arya Lorne, Helen Marsh. And Miss Lorne?" The woman's eyes were grave. "Whatever brought you to Blackridge, whatever you're running from, it might be safer than what you'll find here. Think carefully about whether you really want to stay." The warning should have sent Arya back down those front steps and out of town. Instead, it only strengthened her resolve. She'd spent her entire life running from one threat or another. She was tired of being afraid, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of never having a place to call home. "I'll think about it," she lied. Room 12 was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a hand-stitched quilt and a single window that looked out over the forest. Arya dropped her backpack on the faded carpet and moved to the window, drawn by something she couldn't name. The moon was rising now, full and bright enough to turn the landscape silver. Below, the town looked peaceful, almost ethereal in the moonlight. But as she watched, shadows began to move between the buildings. Not wolves this time. These shapes walked upright, though they moved with the fluid grace of predators. Arya pressed closer to the glass, trying to make out details. That's when she saw him. Caden Thorne stood in the middle of the street directly below her window, his face tilted up toward her room. Even from this distance, she could see the golden glow of his eyes, could feel the intensity of his gaze like a physical touch. They stared at each other across the night, and Arya felt that same strange recognition from earlier settle deeper into her bones. Whatever was happening to her, whatever Blackridge really was, he was at the center of it. As if he could read her thoughts, Caden raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Arya alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if it killed her. Arya woke to the sound of howling. The mournful cries echoed across the valley, weaving together in harmonies that spoke of ancient sorrows and primal longings. She sat up in the narrow bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as the chorus grew louder, closer. Through the thin walls of the inn, she could hear other guests stirring, footsteps in the hallway, hushed voices thick with fear. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 in the morning, its red numbers glowing like eyes in the darkness. Arya wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and crept to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. The town square was full of them. Dozens of wolves moved through the moonlight like living shadows, their fur ranging from purest white to deepest black. They were even larger than she remembered from her encounter earlier, some standing nearly as tall as ponies, but it was their behavior that made her breath catch in her throat. They weren't hunting. They weren't even moving with typical pack dynamics. Instead, they seemed to be gathering, waiting, as if the entire population had been summoned for some purpose she couldn't begin to understand. And at the center of it, all stood the massive black wolf she'd seen before, the one who'd been moments away from attacking her. In the moonlight, Its coat shimmered with an almost metallic sheen, and when it raised its head to howl again, Arya saw intelligence blazing in its amber eyes, the same golden amber as Caden's. The realization hit her like a physical blow. It couldn't be possible. Wolves were animals, magnificent predators but still bound by the laws of nature and biology. The idea that one of them might be something more, might be someone more, belonged to fairy tales and late-night movies. But as she watched the black wolf move through its pack with obvious authority, issuing silent commands through posture and presence alone, Arya felt certainty settling in her bones like ice water. There was something deeply, fundamentally wrong with everything she'd witnessed since arriving in Blackridge. The empty streets, the fearful locals, the coordinated behavior of predators that should have been scattered across hundreds of square miles of wilderness. The truth, impossible as it seemed, stared back at her from the town square below. Those weren't just wolves. They were people. A soft knock at her door made her jump away from the window, the quilt tangling around her feet. She waited, hardly daring to breathe, hoping whoever it was would go away. The knock came again, gentler this time. "Miss Lorne? It's Helen Marsh." Arya crept to the door but didn't open it. "What do you want?" "To talk, please. It's important." After a moment's hesitation, Arya turned the lock. Helen stood in the hallway wearing a thick robe, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. In the dim light, she looked older, more fragile, but her eyes were sharp with purpose. "May I come in?" Arya stepped aside, and Helen entered the room with quick, nervous movements. She went immediately to the window, peering through the curtains at the scene below. "They know you're here," she said without preamble. "They can smell you." "I don't understand what that means." Helen turned away from the window, studying Arya with an expression that mixed pity and something that might have been hope. "How much do you know about your family history, dear?" The question caught Arya off guard. "Not much. I grew up in foster care. My records were sealed. And you never wondered why? Never questioned the circumstances that led to you being alone in the world?" Arya's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She'd wondered. Of course she had. Spent countless nights as a child imagining parents who'd loved her, who'd died in some tragic accident that left her orphaned, but not abandoned. But as she'd gotten older, the dreams had soured into nightmares, scenarios where she'd been given up willingly, where her very existence had been unwanted from the start. What does my past have to do with any of this? Helen moved to the small chair by the window and settled into it with a heavy sigh. 23 years ago, a young woman came through Blackridge. She was running from something, or someone, and she was very pregnant. She begged us for sanctuary, for protection. Arya's chest tightened. "You think that was my mother?" "I know it was. She had your eyes, your hair, same stubborn set to her chin." Helen smiled sadly. "She gave birth here, in this very room. You were the most beautiful baby any of us had ever seen." The walls of the small space seemed to press closer. Arya sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs too weak to support her. "What happened to her?" "She left you with instructions that you were to be taken far from here, far from anything connected to our kind. She said it was the only way to keep you safe." Helen's voice grew thick with old pain. "We honored her wishes, though it broke our hearts. One of our pack members drove you to the nearest human city and made sure you were placed with a good family." Human city. Arya latched onto the phrase, though part of her already knew what it meant. "You're saying she wasn't human." "None of us are, dear. Not entirely." Helen stood and moved to the window again, her movements suddenly more fluid than any 60-year-old woman should possess. "We're werewolves. Shapeshifters. The children of two worlds, bound to both the human and wolf sides of our nature." The words should have sounded insane. A week ago, they would have sent Arya running for the nearest psychiatric facility. But after everything she'd witnessed, everything she'd felt since arriving in Blackridge, they settled into her consciousness with the weight of absolute truth. "The wolves in the square," she whispered. "They're people. They're my family, my pack. And whether we like it or not," Helen's eyes were sad but certain when she looked back at Arya, "they're yours too. That's impossible. I can't change into a wolf. I don't have any supernatural abilities. Don't you?" Helen tilted her head, studying her. "You knew not to run when they surrounded you. Some instinct deeper than conscious thought told you that running would mean death. And Caden, our alpha, he recognized you immediately. Do you think that was coincidence?" Arya thought about the electric shock she'd felt when touching Caden's arm, the way her body had responded to his scent, the strange sense of recognition that had passed between them. I don't understand any of this. Your mother was from one of the old bloodlines, powerful families that could trace their lycanthrope heritage back centuries, but she fell in love with a human man, and their union produced something we'd never seen before, a child who carried the wolf blood, but couldn't access it. A defect, Arya said bitterly. A miracle, Helen corrected firmly. Do you know what happened to your father? Arya shook her head, though something cold was beginning to unfurl in her stomach. He was murdered, torn apart by wolves who couldn't understand what he represented, who saw his relationship with your mother as an abomination. Helen's voice hardened. Your mother came to us seeking justice, but by then she was already marked for death. Her own pack had disowned her for loving a human. Others wanted her dead for the simple crime of existing between two worlds. The howling outside had stopped, Arya realized. The sudden silence was somehow more ominous than the chorus of voices that had preceded it. She could have stayed here, Helen continued. We offered her sanctuary, protection, but she knew that as long as you were with her, you'd never be safe. The old ways run deep, child. There are those among our kind who believe that mixing bloodlines weakens the pack, that children like you are an offense against nature itself. So she abandoned me. The words tasted like ashes. She saved you. There's a difference. Helen's voice was gentle but firm. She gave you a chance to live a normal life, free from the politics and dangers of our world. But she always hoped you'd find your way back to us someday, when you were old enough to choose for yourself. And now I have. Now you have. Helen agreed. The question is, what do you plan to do about it? Before Arya could answer, the lights in the room flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Outside, she could hear sounds that made her blood run cold. Not howling this time, but something worse. Growls, snarls, the sounds of a pack preparing for violence. Helen was at the window again, her face pale with fear. No, she whispered. It's too soon. They promised us more time. What's happening? Other packs. They've found out you're here. Helen spun away from the window, her movements urgent. Get dressed, quickly. We need to get you out of here. Arya was already reaching for her clothes, adrenaline flooding her system. How many are there? Enough to destroy this entire town if we resist them. Helen's voice was grim. They've come for you, Arya, and they won't leave without finishing what they started 23 years ago. The building shook as something massive struck it from outside. In the distance, Arya could hear human screams mixing with inhuman roars. Whatever protection Blackridge had offered was crumbling fast. She pulled on her boots with shaking hands. There has to be somewhere we can hide. There's nowhere to hide from pack law, Helen said. But there might be someone who can protect you. Caden. Helen nodded grimly. He's the strongest alpha for 300 miles. If anyone can stand against them, it's him. But he'll need to claim you first. Claim me how? Before Helen could answer, the door to the room exploded inward. Wood splintered and scattered across the floor as a massive gray wolf forced its way through the opening. Its lips pulled back to reveal fangs that gleamed wet and sharp in the emergency lighting. Helen moved faster than humanly possible, placing herself between Arya and the intruder. But instead of attacking, the wolf seemed to smile, an expression that was deeply wrong on its lupine features. Found you, it said, its voice a mixture of growl and human speech that made Arya's skin crawl. The little half-breed who thinks she can hide among the humans. Marcus, please, Helen said, her voice steady despite the fear radiating from her. She's under our protection. Your protection? The wolf laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your pack couldn't protect a lamb from slaughter. Where's your precious alpha now? As if summoned by the words, another roar split the night, this one closer, filled with fury and territorial rage. The gray wolf's ears flattened against its skull, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered in its yellow eyes. He's coming, Helen said with quiet satisfaction. And when he gets here, you'll wish you'd never set foot in our territory. The wolf's lips pulled back further. By the time he arrives, there won't be anything left to save. It gathered itself to spring, muscles coiling like steel springs. Arya closed her eyes and waited for impact. Instead, she heard the sound of breaking glass. When she opened her eyes, Caden Thorne was standing in the ruins of the window, his clothes torn and bloodied, his golden eyes blazing with murderous intent. He looked at the gray wolf with an expression that promised absolute annihilation. "You have 3 seconds to get out of my territory," he said, his voice barely recognizable as human. "Or I'll tear your throat out and paint these walls with your blood." The gray wolf snarled in response, but Arya could see the fear creeping into its posture. "She doesn't belong to you, Thorn. She doesn't belong to anyone. She belongs to me." The words hit Arya like a physical blow. She looked at Caden in shock, expecting to see possessiveness or dominance in his expression. Instead, she saw something that made her heart skip. Protectiveness so fierce it bordered on desperation. And underneath it all, a longing so deep it took her breath away. "Prove it," the gray wolf challenged. "Mark her, claim her properly, or stand aside and let us finish this." Caden's jaw tightened. "Get out, now. Not without her." What happened next moved too fast for human eyes to follow. One moment the gray wolf was crouched in the doorway, the next it was flying through the air, blood spraying from wounds that had appeared across its flanks as if by magic. Caden stood where it had been, his hand extended, claws that definitely hadn't been there moments before gleaming with crimson. The wolf hit the far wall with a sickening crunch, and didn't get back up. In the sudden silence that followed, Caden turned to look at Arya. His eyes held a wild, desperate quality that made her step back instinctively. "I'm sorry," he said, "but if you want to live through the night, you need to let me claim you. Properly." "What does that mean?" He moved closer, his presence filling the small space. "It means becoming mine in the eyes of every pack for 1,000 miles. It means binding yourself to me so completely that killing you would be an act of war against my entire bloodline." Arya's pulse hammered in her throat. "And if I say no, then you die tonight, and probably most of this town along with you." His voice was rough with pain. "I won't force you, Arya, but I need an answer now." Outside, the sounds of battle were growing closer. Whatever was happening in the streets of Blackridge, it was moving in their direction fast. Helen touched Arya's shoulder gently. "It's your choice, child, but choose quickly." Arya looked at Caden, really looked at him. Beneath the alpha dominance and supernatural power, she saw something that called to her on a level deeper than rational thought. The same recognition she'd felt in the town square, stronger now, demanding acknowledgement. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what happens after tonight?" "After tonight, you'll be under the protection of my pack. No one will be able to hurt you without answering to me." His golden eyes searched hers. "But you'll also be bound to this world, to our ways. There won't be any going back to your human life. The human life that had been nothing but running and hiding and never belonging anywhere." Arya thought of all the times she'd felt like she was searching for something she couldn't name. All the nights she'd dreamed of forests and moonlight and a home she'd never seen. "How does it work?" Caden stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I bite you. Here." His finger traced the curve of her neck, just above her pulse point. "It'll hurt, but only for a moment. And then, you'll be mine forever. Forever." The word should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Do it," she whispered. Caden's eyes flared with something between relief and hunger. He moved closer still, until she was pressed against the wall and surrounded by his warmth, his scent, his presence. One hand braced beside her head, while the other cradled the back of her neck with infinite gentleness. "This might be the worst decision either of us has ever made," he murmured against her ear. "Probably," Arya agreed. "Do it anyway." He pulled back to look at her one last time, and in his eyes she saw a promise that made her heart race. Then he lowered his head, and everything changed forever. The bite was exactly what he'd promised. A sharp pain that flared bright and then faded into something else entirely. Heat spread through her veins like liquid fire, and with it came awareness. Suddenly she could smell things she'd never noticed before. The distinct scents of different people, the complex layers of emotion that hung in the air like perfume, the wildness that lurked just beneath Caden's human facade. And she could feel him. Not just his physical presence, but something deeper. His emotions, his thoughts, the fierce protectiveness that drove him to risk everything for a woman he barely knew. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were glowing like stars. "How do you feel?" Arya took inventory of her body, expecting to find something fundamentally changed. Instead, she felt more. Like she'd been living her entire life with half her senses switched off, and someone had finally found the power button. "Different," she said honestly, "but not bad different." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. the first real expression of happiness she'd seen from him. The changes will be gradual. You might not shift for months, maybe longer, but the mark will protect you. Every wolf for 1,000 miles will know you belong to me now. And do I? The question came out before she could stop it. Belong to you, I mean. His expression grew serious. That depends on what you want. The mark creates a bond between us, but it doesn't control your free will. You can choose to honor it or not. Before Arya could respond, the building shook again, harder this time. Helen, who had been quietly watching their exchange, moved back to the window with urgent steps. "They're at the front door," she said grimly. "Half a dozen of them, maybe more. And they don't look like they're here to negotiate." Caden's arm tightened around Arya protectively. "How many of our people made it to the safe houses?" "Most of them. But Marcus's pack is bigger than we thought. They've got us outnumbered 3-1. Numbers don't matter if they can't get to us." Caden looked around the room, his gaze calculating. "Is the old tunnel system still intact?" Helen nodded. "The entrance is in the basement. But Caden, if they catch us down there, they won't." His voice carried absolute confidence. "I'll make sure of it." He turned back to Arya, his expression gentle despite the violence raging outside. "I know this isn't how you pictured your first night in town, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Looking into his golden eyes, feeling the new bond humming between them like a live wire, Arya found that trust came easier than it should have. "Yes." "Good." He pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her lips that left her breathless. "Then let's go home." The tunnels beneath Blackridge were older than the town itself, carved from living rock by hands that had never seen the light of modern civilization. Helen led the way through passages barely wide enough for 2 people, her small flashlight casting dancing shadows on walls that seemed to press closer with each step. Arya followed directly behind Caden, her hand clasped firmly in his as they navigated the maze of underground corridors. The mark on her neck throbbed with each heartbeat, sending waves of heat through her body that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of their escape. "These were built by the first pack to settle in these mountains," Caden explained in a low voice as they walked. "Over 200 years ago, when humans were still hunting our kind with silver bullets and iron traps. The tunnels connect every major building in town to a series of caves in the forest. How far do they go? Miles, deep enough into the wilderness that even a full pack would have trouble tracking us." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, the simple touch sending sparks of awareness through their newly formed bond. "We'll be safe there until I can contact the other alphas." Behind them, the sound of pursuit had grown fainter, but not disappeared entirely. Occasionally, Arya could hear the distant echo of snarls and crashes as Marcus's pack tore through the inn above them, searching for their trail. "Will they find the entrance?" she whispered. Helen glanced back with a grim smile. "Eventually, but by then we'll be long gone." The tunnel began to slope upward, and cool night air whispered against Arya's face, carrying scents of pine and rich earth. After what felt like hours, but had probably been less than 30 minutes, they emerged into a natural cave system that opened onto a moonlit clearing deep in the forest. Arya took her first breath of free air and nearly staggered under the assault of sensations that hit her enhanced senses. She could smell everything. The distinct musk of at least a dozen different wolves. The lingering fear scent of the townspeople who had passed this way before them. And underneath it all, the wild green scent of the forest itself. "Overwhelming?" Caden asked, his arm sliding around her waist to steady her. "A little," she admitted. "Is it always this intense? You'll learn to filter it out. Right now your senses are wide open because the bond is new." His voice was gentle, patient. "It'll get easier." Helen had moved to the edge of the clearing and was making soft calling sounds. Not quite human, not quite wolf. Within moments, answering calls echoed from the forest around them, and people began emerging from the shadows. They looked like ordinary townsfolk at first glance, but Arya's enhanced perception picked up the subtle signs that marked them as something more. The way they moved with predatory grace despite their human forms. The golden glints in their eyes when the moonlight caught them just right. The careful way they positioned themselves around the clearing's perimeter, instinctively forming a protective barrier. "How many made it out?" Caden asked as an older man approached them. "Most of the pack, Alpha. Families with young children went deeper into the cave system. The fighters are spread through the trees, watching for pursuit." The man's gaze flicked to Arya with unmistakable curiosity. "So, This is the one they came for. Her name is Arya Lorne, Caden said, his voice carrying a subtle warning. She's under my protection now. Marked her, did you? The older man's eyebrows rose. Moving fast, even for you. The situation demanded it. Caden's arm tightened around Arya's waist. Marcus's pack wasn't here for a social visit, Thomas. They came to kill her. Thomas studied Arya with keen eyes that held decades of hard-won wisdom. I can see why. She's got the look of her mother about her. Same stubborn chin, same fire in her eyes. He smiled sadly. Isabella was a good woman, deserved better than the fate that found her. You knew my mother? Arya stepped forward, drawn by the first real information she'd had about the woman who had given her life. Knew her? Girl, I helped deliver you. Thomas chuckled at her startled expression. I was the pack's healer back then, before these old bones started creaking too much for the work. Isabella labored for nearly 18 hours bringing you into this world, and she never stopped talking about the life she wanted to give you. A safe life, away from all this. He gestured around the clearing, where armed wolves kept watch in the darkness, and the sounds of distant pursuit still echoed through the forest. Lot of good that did, Arya said bitterly. Don't be so quick to dismiss her sacrifice, Thomas said gently. You survived, didn't you? Lived 23 years free of pack politics and blood feuds. That's more than most of our children can say. But not forever, Caden interjected. The old bloodlines never forget, and they never forgive. Someone would have found her eventually. The question is, what do we do now? Helen joined their small circle, her face grave with concern. Marcus's pack isn't working alone. I counted at least 3 different scent signatures back at the inn. This is a coordinated effort. Caden's jaw tightened. The council. Arya felt his emotions spike through their bond. Anger, frustration, and underneath it all, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of old battles and older wounds. What's the council? She asked. The governing body that oversees pack law across North America, Thomas explained. 12 alphas from the oldest bloodlines, led by a high alpha who claims descent from the first werewolves to cross the Atlantic. They're also traditionalists, Caden added, his voice dark with old anger. They believe that mixing human and wolf blood weakens our species. Children like you represent everything they stand against. So they want me dead. They want you erased, he corrected grimly, along with any evidence that mixed bloodlines can produce viable offspring. Your very existence challenges their fundamental beliefs about what makes our kind pure. Arya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. How many others like me are there? The silence that greeted her question was answer enough. There were others, Helen said finally. Not many, but a few dozen scattered across the continent. Most were found as children and... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Murdered, Arya said flatly. You mean they were murdered? Yes. Caden's voice was barely controlled rage, hidden away by families who tried to protect them, but the council's reach is long, and their memory longer. One by one they were hunted down. Then why am I still alive? Because your mother was smarter than most, Thomas said with obvious admiration. She didn't try to hide you within the supernatural community. She placed you completely outside it, in the human world where our kind rarely bothers to look. And because she made a bargain, Caden added quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Arya stared at him, feeling something cold and terrible unfurling in her chest. What kind of bargain? Caden exchanged glances with Helen and Thomas, some silent communication passing between them. Finally he sighed, and ran a hand through his dark hair. Your mother offered to submit to council justice if they agreed to leave you alone until your 25th birthday. She gave them 2 years to decide whether mixed bloodlines truly posed a threat to our species. And if they decided we did, so then the amnesty ends, and the hunt begins again. His golden eyes met hers with painful honesty. You have 18 months, Arya. 18 months to prove that your existence doesn't threaten the stability of our world. How am I supposed to prove that? The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with panic and disbelief. I don't even know what I am, let alone how to demonstrate that I'm not dangerous. By living, Thomas said simply. By showing them that mixed blood doesn't make you weak or corrupt. By proving that love between our kinds can create something beautiful instead of something to be feared. And if I can't... The silence stretched until Caden finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. Then I'll protect you for as long as I can, even if it means going to war with the council itself. Arya felt the truth of his words through their bond, along with the depth of his commitment to her safety. But she also felt his certainty that such a war would end only one way, with both of them dead and his pack destroyed in the crossfire. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "There is." The voice came from the edge of the clearing, where a figure had emerged from the forest shadows. Arya turned to see a woman approaching, tall and elegant with silver-streaked hair and eyes that glowed amber in the moonlight. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to command, and the other wolves in the clearing immediately lowered their heads in respectful acknowledgement. "Luna Catherine," Caden said, his voice tight with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here. When word reached me that Isabella's daughter had finally surfaced, I came as quickly as I could." The woman, Catherine, smiled at Arya with genuine warmth. "You have your mother's eyes, child, and her stubborn streak from what I've heard. You knew my mother too. I was her friend, her ally, and one of the few members of the council who voted against the original persecution of mixed bloodlines." Catherine's expression grew grave. "I've spent the last 23 years working to change minds and build support for a more progressive view of our species' future." "With any success?" Caden asked hopefully. "Some. The council is divided now in ways it wasn't when Isabella first came before them. 3 members have come around to my position. 2 more are wavering. And the rest," she shrugged eloquently. "Well, change comes slowly to those who've lived for centuries." Arya felt a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "So, there's a chance they might reverse their decision." "More than a chance, if we play this correctly." Catherine moved closer, her gaze intent. "But it will require you to do something that goes against every instinct your mother tried to instill in you. Which is, stop hiding. Come before the council willingly, and demand recognition as a full member of our society." Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. "Show them that mixed blood doesn't make you weak. It makes you something they've never seen before." Caden stepped protectively closer to Arya. "Catherine, that's suicide. If the council votes against her, then she dies with dignity, instead of being hunted like prey through the forest." Catherine's voice was matter of fact. "But if she can convince them, if she can prove that her heritage is a strength rather than a weakness, then she changes the future for every mixed-blood child who might be born in the generations to come." "How many are we talking about?" Arya asked quietly. "Hundreds, potentially. As our kinds continue to interact, as the barriers between human and supernatural communities continue to break down, children like you are inevitable. The question is whether they'll be celebrated or slaughtered." The weight of that responsibility settled on Arya's shoulders like a physical burden, hundreds of lives hanging in the balance. Children who might live or die based on the choice she made in this moonlit clearing. "When would I have to appear before them?" "The next gathering is in 6 weeks, at the winter solstice. The council meets at the old fortress in Quebec, where the original accords were signed." Catherine paused. "But Arya, you should know. If you choose this path, there's no guarantee of protection. Once you enter council territory, even Caden won't be able to shield you from their judgment." Through their bond, Arya felt Caden's fierce opposition to the plan, his desperate desire to find any other solution that didn't require her to walk voluntarily into mortal danger. But she also felt something else, his pride in her courage, his awe at her willingness to risk everything for people she'd never met. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Catherine nodded graciously. "But don't take too long. Word of tonight's events will reach the council within days. Once they know you've surfaced and bonded with an alpha, the amnesty period may be accelerated." She turned to go, then paused and looked back at Arya with something that might have been maternal affection. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become," she said softly. "And more than that, she'd be proud of the choice you're going to make." "How can you be so sure what I'll choose?" Catherine's smile was warm with certainty. "Because you're Isabella's daughter, and she never backed down from a fight that mattered, no matter how impossible the odds." With that, she melted back into the forest shadows, leaving Arya alone with her impossible decision and the growing certainty that her quiet human life was truly over forever. Around the clearing, the pack continued their vigilant watch as dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. And in that gentle light, Arya finally understood what her mother had known all those years ago. Sometimes love means making the hardest choice of all, even when it breaks your heart. "Whatever you decide," Caden said softly, his arms wrapping around her from behind. "I'll be with you. Every step of the way. Every—" Arya leaned back against his solid warmth and felt the truth of his promise settle into her bones. She might be facing an impossible choice, but she wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in her life, she truly belonged somewhere, and she'd fight to protect that belonging, no matter the cost. As the sun rose over the mountain peaks, painting the world in shades of hope and possibility, Arya Lorne made her choice. Not just for herself, but for every child like her who might someday need the freedom to love across the boundaries of species and blood. She would go before the council. She would demand recognition, and she would win, or die trying. Because some fights were worth everything. And love, the love that had brought her into existence, the love that had protected her all these years, and the love that blazed between her and the alpha who held her heart, was the most important fight of all. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Black Ridge Community Center, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden air like tiny spirits celebrating the new day. Arya stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. Werewolves sat beside humans, their children playing together on the carpet at the front of the room, while their parents listened to her weekly integration seminar. Some faces still held traces of wariness. Change came slowly to those who had lived in secrecy for generations, but most showed the kind of cautious hope that had become Blackridge's signature emotion. The key to successful coexistence, Arya was saying, isn't pretending our differences don't exist. It's learning to see those differences as strengths rather than threats. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. Maria Santos, one of the human families who had moved to Blackridge after the council's historic decision, looked nervous but determined. "What about safety concerns? I mean, I trust everyone here, but my daughter asks questions about why some of her friends' eyes glow sometimes." Arya smiled warmly. "Honesty, age-appropriate honesty, is always the best policy. Children are remarkably adaptable when they're given truth instead of fear." From the back of the room, she caught sight of Caden leaning against the wall, his golden eyes bright with pride and something deeper, the contentment of a man who had found his purpose as surely as he had found his mate. The mark on her neck thrummed with warm connection, and she felt his encouragement flow through their bond like liquid sunshine. "My own daughter will grow up knowing both sides of her heritage," Arya continued, her hand moving instinctively to rest on the gentle curve of her stomach. "She'll understand that being different isn't something to hide from or be ashamed of. It's something to celebrate." The pregnancy had been a surprise, discovered just weeks after the council vote that had changed everything. Mixed-blood children were no longer hunted. They were welcomed as bridges between two worlds. The future Arya carried beneath her heart would be brighter than anything her mother could have imagined. After the seminar ended, and the families had dispersed to their Sunday afternoon activities, Caden approached the podium with 2 cups of the herbal tea that had become Arya's new obsession. "Good session," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Though I think you're going to have to address the Parker family's concerns about full moon protocols soon. Already scheduled for next week." Arya accepted the tea gratefully, savoring the warmth and the familiar comfort of Caden's presence, along with a joint session with Dr. Martinez about supernatural human couples counseling. "Look at you, solving the world's problems one seminar at a time. Someone has to." She leaned into his embrace, marveling as she did every day at how perfectly they fit together. Besides, Luna Catherine says there are 3 other communities requesting similar programs. Apparently, our little experiment is becoming a model for integration efforts across the continent. Caden's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "From refugee to revolutionary in 6 months. Your mother would be amazed. I think she'd be proud," Arya corrected softly. "This is what she wanted. A world where children like ours could grow up free to be everything they were meant to be." Through the windows, she could see the town square where her journey had begun. The fountain had been restored and now sparkled in the afternoon light, surrounded by gardens that bloomed with flowers planted by human and werewolf hands working together. Children, both kinds, played on new equipment while their parents chatted on benches that no longer divided into separate groups. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still those on both sides who viewed the integration with suspicion, still moments of tension when old prejudices surfaced. But progress, Arya had learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing hope over fear, understanding over hatred, Love over separation. Mrs. Thorne. Arya turned to see Lucy Chen, one of the werewolf teenagers whose family had been among the first to embrace the new openness. The girl held a piece of paper in her hands, her expression bright with excitement. "I got accepted," Lucy said, practically vibrating with joy, "to the veterinary program at the university. They said my application essay about bridge building between species was the most compelling they'd ever read." "Lucy, that's wonderful." Arya pulled the girl into a warm hug, feeling Caden's pleasure echo through their bond. "Your parents must be so proud." "They are, and they wanted me to thank you, again, for everything you've done to make this possible." Lucy's eyes shone with tears of happiness. 3 years ago, I thought I'd have to hide what I was for the rest of my life. Now I'm going to study to help both humans and our kind. After Lucy left to share her news with friends, Arya and Caden walked slowly toward home, the house they'd built together on the hill overlooking Blackridge, with rooms for the family they were creating, and gardens where human herbs grew alongside the wild plants that called to their werewolf nature. "Any regrets?" Caden asked as they paused on their front porch, looking out over the community they'd helped build. Arya considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a refugee running from a past she didn't understand. Now she was a wife, soon-to-be mother, teacher, advocate, and bridge builder between worlds. The quiet human life she'd once imagined seemed like someone else's dream. "Not one," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even with all the challenges ahead, the resistance from traditionalists on both sides, the fact that we're essentially writing the handbook for supernatural human relations as we go." Arya smiled, feeling their daughter flutter gently beneath her heart, a child who would never have to choose between her human and werewolf heritage because she would grow up in a world where both were celebrated. "Especially because of all that," she said. "The challenges mean what we're building matters. The resistance means we're changing things that needed changing. And the fact that we're writing the handbook," she turned in his arms, meeting his golden gaze with certainty that blazed as bright as any supernatural power. "That means we get to decide what the future looks like." Caden's smile was radiant as he pulled her closer, their bond singing with shared purpose and unshakable love. "In that case, Mrs. Thorne, what does our future look like?" Arya looked out over Blackridge, their home, their community, their impossible dream made manifest, and saw children of both kinds playing together under the setting sun, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze like a promise of better days to come. "Bright," she said simply. "It looks bright. It looks—" And in the distance, as if in response to her words, the first wolves of evening began to sing, not with the lonely howls of creatures in hiding, but with the joyous chorus of a pack that had finally found its way home, just as she had, just as they all had, together. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.